Down the Dark Lane, 3 Thrillers from the Motel, by Ned DeHaan. The audiobook. Made available on BlackBoxOnlineRadio. Please consider supporting this channel at BuyMeACoffee.com. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNed88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help the show. Chapter 8. I moved forward, and then I began to look around the excellently decorated trailer interior. Each wall was lined with pictures of mountains, beaches, and waterfalls. Suddenly, I couldn't feel the cold winds anymore. "Have a seat," Jamie suggested. I sat down on a spotless white couch, but Jamie remained standing. "Jamie," the voice called from the kitchen, "is that you?" "Yes, it is, Grandma," she answered. A woman entered from the kitchen wearing an apron and holding a tray of cookies. I could not believe it. This was the typical grandmother that everyone sees in children's books. Norman Rockwell could not have painted a more kind-looking grandmother. "Well, Jamie, who is this?" she said, referring to me. "This is Charlie," she introduced me. "Charlie, this is my Grandma Jane." I stood up to introduce myself. "No, stay right down," Jane insisted. "Here, have some chocolate chip cookies." Yep, she really was the perfect grandmother. I just hoped that I didn't shatter the cookies onto her perfect white couch in her perfectly comfortable abode. "Well, Charlie," she began, "if you're a friend of Jamie's, then you're a friend of mine." "Thank you," was all I could say without sounding too drunk. "Why don't we sit on the porch?" Jane suggested. "It's so nice out, and we can see the sunset soon." "Sounds good," Jamie agreed. "Hey, Grandma, Charlie is just passing in from D.C., and I think he could use something to eat. I was wondering if you had any leftovers." "Now you don't even have to ask, Jamie," Grandma Jane almost cut her off. "You two sit right on the porch, and I will join you in 5 minutes, and then Charlie can tell me all about Washington, D.C., if he doesn't mind." "Will do," I said, too loudly. So much for hiding my drunkenness. Grandma Jane just smiled. Jamie took me out on the porch, and I'm not sure if took was the right word. It was more like she dragged me roughly and forcefully once her grandmother was out of sight, and she closed the door behind her. You okay?" I inquired. "Fine," she mumbled, but I was pretty sure she was not. Jamie didn't say anything for the next 5 minutes. I just kept eating the cookies that her grandmother had made, and Jane reappeared with a tray in her hand. It had some sort of meat and a lot of rice. "I hope you like Egyptian food," said Jane. "My grandson went to Egypt and he brought me back 2 Egyptian cookbooks. Now that is the only thing I make. And I told Jamie if she ever had a friend over she could come by and I would cook up a storm. Thankfully I already made some Zhezhka beer last night, so it's all hot and ready to go." I had no idea what that was, but I had the strong idea that I was going to love it. She set the tray down on the green plastic floor, and then Jamie said, "I'll get another chair, but you two start eating. I need to make a phone call." Jane handed me a plate and picked one up for her as well. "Jamie is a wonderful girl," she mentioned. I nodded. "It's a shame she had to live in this shithole of a town," Jane almost roared. I coughed at seeing and hearing the change in her personality once Jamie was gone. 1 second she was the kind and loving grandmother, and now she just looked sour and bitter. "What do you mean?" I asked in confusion. "Mr. Charlie, have you seen this town?" she questioned me. "This town is a dump. It is a rotting scar on the face of the earth. It's fine for someone like me, an old lady who works in the garden and spends the afternoon cooking Egyptian dinners and baking. I'll bake anything from any part of the world. I'm fine with this life. But this is no place for Jamie." "I guess not," I nodded along. "But why doesn't she leave?" Jane turned to me and just stared at the floor. "Things are complicated," she admitted. "I guess that's how I got mixed up in my own life. Complicated things. If things had not been complicated, I would have graduated from Mississippi Valley State and started working there as a graduate assistant, or maybe even a janitor on Baffin Island in Canada. From what Jessie said, they were actually paid rather well. But things were different. I could not stand living in that small town in Mississippi. Holly Springs, Mississippi. I thought I had escaped when I moved to Mississippi Valley State. I was wrong. I even had a faded memory of telling someone, "Woo-hoo! I escaped our county." But moving across a few counties doesn't change much, so I know Jamie must be feeling the same thing. Sometimes it feels like that girl is the only thing I got, Jane continued. Her parents never visit me, and her brother is back in California programming computers. The best part of my day is when Jamie comes by with a friend for dinner. I can understand that. I grinned as I took another bite of the wonderful shish kabir. From this point, I had learned that zhezh must have been chicken, or at least it tasted like chicken. However, despite her exceptional skills at cooking Egyptian food, Grandma Jane seemed like she had a few secrets of her own. If anyone was to hurt that girl, Jane went on, I would not take kindly to it. At that moment, I realized that Jane was staring at me with a true look of scorn. Oh, no, wait. I started to ramble because I was caught off guard. You can't think that you can't think that's enough, Charlie. She stopped me. You might be a decent human being, but there's also a chance that you're a rapist, an arsonist, or a potential assassin. I gulped. And I hope you would understand why I think so, she started. Because when my little girl brings home a man off the highway who is shit-faced drunk and is sloppier than a manwich on toast, I start to get protective. You've got nothing to worry about, I defended myself. That's what a rapist, arsonist, or assassin would say. She had a fair point there. Just so you know, Charlie, she kept hammering me, many have tried to hurt my girl, but no one has succeeded. Now I know. Now eat your zhezh. It'll get cold. She laughed. I wanted to laugh too, but for once during this trip, I found that I was not laughing. Instead, I almost wanted to run. Sometimes people just emit vibes that make you want to run and never look back. Grandma Jane made me want to sprint a marathon to get away from her. On the other hand, Jamie wanted me to stay close by and never leave. The women in her family were quite strange. So, how was it at the Greens? Jane asked me. How did you know I was there? I needed to know. Chapter 9. Jane was now grinning, and she was looking sinister. There was no response. Well, I hoped for a response. Hey, I'm back. Did you miss me, Grandma? Jamie called as she rejoined us. So, Charlie, did my grandmother give you a hard time? What should I have said? Not at all, I retorted. She's a great cook. At least if zhezh was actually chicken, then yeah, she was a great cook, I thought silently. Then you have to stay for dessert, Jane grinned. I could have gone for dessert, even though eating anything sweet would probably trigger regurgitation. I could already feel my stomach was turning with some alcohol and Egyptian chicken. Jamie's grandmother could hide her darkness too well, but when I saw Jamie looking at her, I could see that the darkness was not in Jamie at all. I don't know if I can handle dessert tonight, Jamie declined the invitation. Charlie and I have to be somewhere in an hour, but I wouldn't mind going for a walk. Walking is one of the few activities that people can actually do around Queen's Rock, Jane joked. And it was strange for me to see how her personality could change so quickly. We ate the rest of the possible chicken, and then we got up. Jamie and her grandmother began walking down the street. Jane was next to me, and she was arm in arm with Jamie. It was so cold right now, but Jamie and Jane were not wearing any coats of any kind. They did not seem bothered by the weather. At this point, we began walking down a different street that Jamie and I had not covered yet. For starters, there were no houses. Also, there was not even a blade of grass in sight. There were only endless rows of dirt, one stretch of sidewalk, and a rickety old building at the end, which looked like it had never been a residence for anyone. For the first time in a while, I ignored the cold wind. The only thing that made my body change was thinking about Jane and the conversation we had just had. That made me shiver. Why did she sound like she wasn't making it up? Jamie began heading back toward us, and both Jane and I turned to see her. Earlier today I had experienced something that I was not prepared for. When I opened the door to the Greens Motel, I had no idea how to handle the situation. Now, I was placed in a similar spot. Did Jamie know that her grandmother ran around saying stuff like that? And more importantly, for my sake, why was I still standing there? As much as I hated the idea of how embarrassing it was for Charlie Roberts to run away from an elderly woman, I felt there was some other reason that my feet stayed planted on the pieces of concrete while we were looking around. Grandma Jane likes to bring everyone to Queen's Rock. She likes to show them the mill, Jamie explained to me. Built in 1789, Jane chimed in. It's the oldest building still standing in Queen's Rock. And you know, it was bought by an English couple in 1986, and they sold it to two people from New York. They now use it as a house. Maybe if Jamie runs up and knocks, Charlie could get a quick tour. Sometimes they offer tours to travelers. Maybe, said Jamie, but Charlie and I are kind of pressed for time. Oh, come on, dear, Jane begged. Just ask for me, please. I promise we'll be really quick. I won't hold you kids up. Charlie and I will wait right here. Jamie could not say no. She nodded and headed down toward the mill. Once Jamie was out of earshot, her grandmother turned to me, and I saw her dark side again. You know, there's a body buried under this very step, she whispered to me in a rather cold voice. Some young man just would not leave Jamie alone, so I couldn't allow that. I had to take care of it. You're messing with me, I brushed it off. Well, use your head, Charlie, she almost giggled. That was 5 years ago, right before they put this sidewalk in place. The night before they dropped the concrete, I dropped him in the dirt. That's what you get if you ever mess with my girl. And that's what you do with a body if you never want the body to be found. I could not believe it. Jane had just claimed that this was the resting place of someone who had harassed Jamie when she was 14 years old. She claimed that she had murdered him. If Jamie had wanted me to sober up, she had done an excellent job. I felt wide awake, and I wanted to leave. They're closed, Grandma, Jamie informed us. Too bad, I replied almost too sarcastically. Yes, it's a real shame, Jane agreed with me. I'm so disappointed that Charlie couldn't see the mill. It's getting close to our time, Jamie told her grandmother. I think Charlie and I should head back to town. Right, I'll walk you two back over to Main Street, she volunteered. I wanted to scream the words, oh, hell no, but for some reason I couldn't find the courage nor the audacity. We began to backtrack over the dead-looking street, and Grandma Jane kept smiling at me. Why was the street so barren? I could only wonder. Why is this street so bare? I asked Jamie. Haha, it used to be all trees, she laughed. But that was before somebody decided to mow them all down and build a subdivision. They cut down all the trees on this block, Jane added. And then they delayed the construction for 6 years. Just last month they started clearing out the vegetation so they could start over. I'm just glad they were able to put in the sidewalk when they did. Jane realized that my eyes looked a little nerved by the comment. It makes it so much easier for someone like me to walk to the mill, Jane clarified. And just like that, Jamie and Jane began to tell me all about the town of Queen's Rock as we headed back to Angelito's to meet Little Jack. It was hard to pay attention to all of the details because they were rambling on so fast, but I saw the salvage yard and I learned when it was created. And I learned that the town actually had a council that tried to prevent the salvage yard from opening. I could not even believe that there was a town council for Queen's Rock, because the sign on the town read unincorporated. Thankfully, before I knew it, we were standing in front of Angelito's, and then I was saying goodbye to Grandma Jane. Jamie gave her grandmother a kiss and a hug, and she assured us that she would be fine walking back later that night. Honestly, I was not too worried. Can you believe she's almost 87? Jamie asked me. Really? Wow, I pretended to care. She looked old, but she didn't look that old. I would have guessed that she was in her early 70s at most. She doesn't look it at all, Jamie smiled. It's because she's always active. She never stops working in the garden or over the stove. One day she's going to wear herself out. I really believe that Jamie had no idea that once her back was turned, Grandma Jane revealed the secrets of her criminal past. There was no reason for me to believe anything that Jane had told me, but for some reason it felt so true. When Jamie talked about her grandmother, there was nothing but purity in her eyes. Jamie admired her so much. Perhaps I shouldn't say anything. Even if I did say something, I doubted that she would hear any of it. I couldn't imagine believing something like that if I had heard it from a stranger. If someone had said that about my grandmother, I wouldn't have believed them. As we watched Jane walk out into the distance, Little Jack emerged from the doorway at Angelito's. You two ready? He wanted to know. Of course we're ready, Jamie replied. There was a difference in Jamie when she talked to different people, but it was hard to pinpoint. It was almost as if she was trying to talk to Little Jack in a way that would make him do things, but when she talked to her grandmother, it was out of pure love. I could tell that she loved her grandmother and her grandmother loved her, but Jamie wanted to manipulate every single other person. Her voice just sounded like it was in control and ordering them around, but for some reason, no one seemed bothered by it. Even I had to admit, I wasn't bothered by it. "Let's get going," Little Jack called to us. Jamie and I began to follow him, and I noticed that the sky was now a dark color of blue. The twilight was turning into night. From what I had seen of Queen's Rock during the day light, it would probably give me nightmares for the rest of my life. I could not imagine what a place like this was like at night. Little Jack led us to a small parking lot that had an old Ford F-150 pickup truck. It was a dark shade of red, and it looked like it was about to fall apart at any second. The pickup truck had a two-door cab and no back seat, so that meant one thing. "Jamie takes the other seat," Little Jack announced. "You get to ride in the bed." I nodded, but really, I was surprised that Little Jack could even see over the steering wheel. The truck started and the engine sounded perfect, but as we began to drive away from the unincorporated city limits of Queen's Rock, I began to wonder what had just happened. Jamie's grandmother was completely insane, and she casually bragged to me about murdering someone and burying him under the sidewalk. It was probably my long-term interests to stay away from Jamie. Some things were not so easy to do, though. I just hopped in the bed of the pickup and let Little Jack drive. Whatever dizziness I had experienced from the wine was gone. Grandma Jane had recalibrated me, like being drenched with a bucket of cold water in the morning. In a minute we were in front of the Greens, but to my surprise, I was not afraid like I thought I would be. I was not super happy about the idea of returning, but as Jamie said, this sure made things interesting. Chapter 10. Room number 1 was now covered in yellow and black police caution tape, and Little Jack was furious about it. "Look at this garbage," he almost erupted. "I'm going to lose a week of business over this bullshit. And why? All because some perverts were too perverted." Sometimes I had poor taste in humor, and this moment was one of them. For some reason I found Little Jack swearing in his Bangladeshi accent to be hilarious. I was now sober enough not to laugh at the smallest things, but I wasn't sober enough to hide the giant grin on my face. I covered it with my mouth because I didn't want to embarrass him. "So, what do you want to know?" Little Jack asked us as we got out of the pickup truck. I jumped down from the F-150 and I walked around to Jamie's side. "Who was here in the afternoon?" Jamie started. "Can you tell us the names and what they looked like?" "1 second, Little Jack said as he unlocked the office. We entered, and the smell of milk hit me again, like a freight train. It literally almost made me jump out of the motel office and fall to my knees from weakness, and this was my second exposure. I wondered what it was coming from. "There were only 4 guests today other than Charlie," Little Jack started, reading from a green notebook. "I only write down last names: Dawson, Osmond, Withers, and Olson." "Okay, good," Jamie complimented him. It sounded like she was talking to a dog, but for some reason Little Jack didn't notice. "So, let's start with Dawson. What was he or she like?" "Dawson was a man," Little Jack divulged. "Osmond and Withers were also men, and Olson was a woman. They were all white." "Caucasian," I corrected him unnecessarily. "Pardon me?" Little Jack replied sarcastically. "Dawson was really big and tall. He had a beard that was black. I remember thinking that it must have been hair dye or something. You must have seen that just from hair dye. For beards, it's so dark, and he was wearing his hat backwards. He didn't ask any questions about the room. He just said, 'I need a room,' and he paid in cash." "What was he driving?" Jamie asked. "He was driving a red Isuzu Amigo," Little Jack read out of his book. "Osmond was a tall, skinny man. He was a blonde, and he was carrying a big blue backpack, like the ones mountain climbers wear." "Mountain climbers?" I repeated. "Yes," Little Jack insisted. "It was a huge backpack, one for camping. What is it called, a rail or a rack? I don't know. I don't care, but it was a big backpack. And Withers was a man around Charlie's age. He was wearing a checkered shirt, black and yellow, almost like a taxicab pattern, and he had really big glasses." "What color hair did he have?" Jamie pressed. "None. Little Jack responded instantly. He shaved his head. And the last one was Olsen. She said she was Swedish, and she had an accent. I mean, she was Swedish, but she had a Swedish passport, and she was blonde and she talked too much, but I don't really know about any of them. The system is here. People show up, and they give me $40, and I give them a key, and I don't see them again until the morning when they leave. For starters, Little Jack told me that the rooms were $59.99, and he was doing me a favor of dropping the price to $40. I could have confronted him, but I bit my tongue. You liar, I shouted silently in my mind. I know, Jamie spoke to him comfortingly, but did you see anything abnormal? Did anything seem wrong? Do you have the times when they checked in? I inquired. I checked in around 2:30, and you don't normally let people in until 3 o'clock. When I got here, there were 4 cars already here, so they must have been here way before me. Jamie turned to me, and she almost seemed impressed. Yes, I let them in before 3, Little Jack admitted, but this is my business and I can let them in any time I want as long as the room is ready. I know, I stated, but you said they all checked in today. What times did they check in? It would take a lot of time to sneak somebody into room number 1 and, well, do all of that stuff. It definitely didn't happen in a few minutes. At least, I don't think it happened that fast. Little Jack put his hands down on the motel desk counter. He pondered what I had just said for a moment. I don't really know, he realized. I started letting people in at 11. I had the open rooms and they were already clean, so I didn't bother waiting until 3. You, Charlie, were the 5th person in 4 hours to check in. I thought that today was going to be a great day for business, but now it is the official worst day ever. But nothing strikes me as strange, except that Osmond. Why him? Jamie asked. I think that he was on some kind of methamphetamine, guessed Little Jack. His eyes were sagging and his skin was yellow almost. Not quite, but almost. I know he must have been on something. I honestly had never been a drug addict. Also, my only friend Jessie had never been a drug addict. But I did know for a fact that drug addicts did things out of desperation. There was no way to tie this Mr. Osmond to the body, yet, that was left in room number 1. But perhaps Little Jack was on to something. Was he the first to arrive? I took a guess. Yes, said Little Jack. How did you know that? He came here just after 11. I didn't know that, I clarified. Just guessing. All of the other guests, other than you, Charlie, were relocated to the Holiday Inn in Fredericksburg up the road, Little Jack graciously explained. A smile was once again growing on Jamie's face. Are you up for a drive, Jack? Jamie proposed. Little Jack shook his head and showed that he could resist Jamie's charm to some extent. I can't go anywhere, he enlightened us. I'm going to sleep. This day is not going to get any worse. Instead, it is going to end. Good night, and Charlie, don't forget your bag. That damn neutron star bag. Okay, how about letting us borrow your truck? She shot him with another proposal. I'll drive, and Charlie can sit in the passenger seat, and the 2 of us will go up to Fredericksburg, and then we'll be back in 2 hours max. I'm a good driver, and nothing will happen to the truck. Little Jack looked a little shocked at the idea. He appeared to be on the verge of either a stroke or a brain aneurysm. Are you insane, Jimmy Laurent? He countered. I have had enough loss for a day, and I am not going to give out my truck to anyone for any reason. As of now, that is the only thing that still has some value, and there is no way that I am going to— You're wrong, Jamie interrupted him. The things that have the most value are me and Charlie. In case you can't tell, we are the only 2 people trying to help you. If we can find out something, you can get that caution tape off the door, and business can open up again. Do you really think the police are going to help you? They only help by locking people up. And in all honesty, I am shocked that you're not in the tank right now. Lock me up? Jack snapped. Why, I didn't do anything. I'm not responsible for the actions of guests in the motel. But this is your property, Jamie challenged him. You were the one who had a dead body in unit number 1, right next to the manager's office. How long will it be before they start connecting some of the dots that shouldn't be connected? You don't know what you're talking about, Jamie, Little Jack barked back. But I do, Jamie debated. Look, Jack, I know you didn't do anything wrong. I've known you long enough to know that you wouldn't do something like that. You wouldn't commit a crime like that. You've been nothing but angry all afternoon. If you were involved, you'd be thinking about something other than reopening the motel, right? I suppose, Jack admitted. I'm on your side, Jack, Jamie raised her voice. Charlie and I are the only ones who are trying to make things right. And when we make things right, that is good for you. So you have to trust me. I stood back, and I watched little Jack think over the idea. His fingers started tapping the desk counter. Then he scratched his chin, and then his lip, for just a little. Fine, he gave in, almost like an automated command. But if any single thing happens to that truck, you are paying for it, Jamie. I will go to Bob Smith at Chevron and take it straight from your paycheck. You understand? Crystal clear, Jamie agreed. Little Jack tossed her the key across the counter, and he looked like he was already regretting his choice. Now, I'm going to bed, he said with a sigh of relief. Be back in 2 hours, and park in the same space where it is. Then leave me the key under the mat, under the front passenger side mat, that is. And please, for the love of all things holy, do not lock the doors after you have left the key in them. Again, crystal clear. Jamie obviously lied, and yet again I stood there doing nothing. Just like that, I followed her outside, and I headed for the passenger seat of the truck. There's one thing, Charlie, she called to me. What's that? I questioned. I don't know how to drive, she spoke without confidence for the first time. But you just told little Jack I had to say that I was a good driver. She cut me off before I could finish. He wouldn't have given me the keys if I hadn't said that. I can't drive, I persisted. I'm still kind of drunk. I mean, I don't feel drunk, but I'm not taking a chance like that, wrecking Jack's truck. I mean, I don't really feel like that drunk, as I said, but I probably have alcohol in my bloodstream. This guy has had a lousy day already, and I'm not going to be the one who's going to make it worse. Okay, that's great, but I still don't know how to drive, Jamie persevered. And if you were drunk more than 2 hours ago, and you've been eating, you're probably pretty close to sober right now. And like I said, I don't know how to drive. I didn't want to do it. I really did not want to do it. Just give me the keys, I crumbled. It was too hard to say no. I got behind the steering wheel, and I began to drive away. I was now really starting to feel uncomfortable around Jamie, but for some reason I was still doing her bidding. As we headed onto the highway, we passed my old Volvo 240 DL, sitting idly on the side of the road. When my tire had gone flat, I had not cared at all if the car was stolen or vandalized or anything, really. But now I began to wonder about things. Did I lock all the doors? Was there anything valuable in the trunk? Did I remember to throw away my cup of tea? I sometimes drink half tea, half milk, so if it sits in the car for too long, it all starts to curdle. But I just kept driving. I did not remember that there was a Holiday Inn in Fredericksburg, so I had to rely on Jamie for directions. We mainly stayed on the main highway, but then she instructed me to turn off on a side road. It's just 2 miles from here, she said. I kept my foot on the gas, and I wanted to get out of the car and be done with this business. Although Jamie was the one caught in the thrill of the moment, I had to admit I was pulled in somewhat as well. It is no surprise that I found the landscape between Queens Rock and Fredericksburg to be even more boring in the dark, and by this point I was thinking about what it would have been like to just sit down in that motel bed at the Greens. If only that stupid corpse had not turned up, I would have had my rest and not have been sucked into this murderous investigation. The side road off the main highway was littered with trees and grass. I didn't see a single commercial building for a while. This was hardly the prime location for a corporate business such as the Holiday Inn. I would know. I was a serious employee of a slightly better version of it. My eyes locked in on a yellow line in the center of the road when the car began to slow down. What are you doing? Jamie inquired. I'm not doing anything, I swore. Then I looked at the dials in front of me and I saw that there was a fuel arrow pointing directly at the letter E. And I was told that the E on the dashboard meant extra 10 miles. Well, that wasn't true. We're out of gas, I grumbled as I steered the car off to the side of the road, and it landed in a complete stop. Shit! Jamie cursed with passion. Where's the nearest station? I asked. Jamie shrugged. I think there's a Sitco or something near the Holiday Inn, and maybe it shouldn't be that far. She made things sound like they were under control. Jamie peered out the window. You know, Charlie, she began, we're not that far. Look outside. I think I can even see the sign. I unbuckled my seatbelt and got out of the pickup's cab. It was nearly 8 o'clock, and the sky was completely dark. And sure enough, there was the orange, yellow, and green of the Holiday Inn logo. What was with it with my luck of breaking down 600 feet in front of motels or hotels? Come on, let's go, Jamie almost forced me. And this time there was no alternative. Also, it was the best idea for our present circumstances. Even if we didn't find the people we were seeking, we could at least get the gas and drive back to the Green Greens. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was the true meaning of the term wild goose chase. It was almost worse than the overused needle in a haystack metaphor, and sometimes simile. Or maybe it was a simile. Perhaps it depended on the context and the sentence structure. Jamie and I began walking down the narrow strip of grass on whatever road it was. I was so bad at paying attention to details that it hardly seemed fitting for a person like me to be chasing the identity of a murderer. We walked in silence for about 300 feet, and the landscape drastically changed. The rural surroundings of the trees and the greenery had faded, and small shops and businesses had popped up in front of us. The largest of them was the Holiday Inn, with its glowing neon lights. I saw a McDonald's and a small sign that said something about a grocery, and a few houses were still intermixed in the area. This isn't Fredericksburg, I stated the obvious. Where are we? Nope, it's not Fredericksburg, Jamie agreed. We just call it South. I guess it's the closest thing it has to a real name. I turned away from Jamie and I noticed that there was a figure approaching us, but there was no chance it was Osmond. It was obviously female, and the person walked along without paying attention as we drew closer. It was hard to see her image in the darkness, but it seemed like she was about Jamie's height, and she had blonde hair. Jamie's blonde hair was rather dark, though, almost like a dirty blonde, and this woman had hair that was glowing in a golden way, and also she was rather short, but other than that she definitely had an appearance that I would describe as Swedish. She looked Swedish. Excuse me, are you Swedish? I called to her.